Hey everyone, how is it going? Welcome to another video. In this video, I will be analyzing all my games from the 2022 Chess.com Daily Chess Championship. So I will be analyzing all my games in round one. My username on chess.com is no face, no name, no number 7. And I scored 22 points in 22 games. That means I won all my games. So I was playing for the first time in my life in the Daily Chess Championship, and I was in group 2708. And here are my opponents. So we had every group has 12 players. So you play 11 different opponents with both colors. So you play them once with white and once with black. So I will start by analyzing my games. My last opponent was Slav from India, and I won by default. So here with white, I played d4, and with black, they did not make a move. So I won by default. Number 11 is Fahad Balok Clash, who comes from, I'm not entirely sure which is this country, but I won both games again by default. Here he played one move, so it was d4, a6, e4, and with white they failed to make a move against me. So I just wanted to see where are they from, and they are from Oman. Yeah, Oman is a very nice country. I studied about it when I was in university. So number 10 was Said 9898, who comes from, I'm assuming this is Azerbaijan, but I just want to confirm. Yes, from Azerbaijan. So here I won 1d4, they didn't make a move, and here they failed to make a move with white. Now I'm moving on to the games where my opponents did make a move, and here it's number 9 against Daniel Maser from Italy. So overall, throughout my life, I have been a 1e4 player, and you can see that also from checking my games on ChessBase, for example. But I am trying to expand and to become more flexible with my openings. So I am playing in this tournament exclusively 1d4, at least so far. And it's been going quite well. And I've decided to play the main line of 1d4 because I am not really a fan of playing sidelines like the London system or other sidelines. So here my opponent went for the Slav defense. c6 is the move which defines the Slav defense. The other main moves in this position are e6, which is the Queen's Gambit declined, and also d takes c4, which is the Queen's Gambit accepted. Of course, there are other moves like 2c5, which Mamediyarov is known for playing. Bishop f5 is the Bakhtik. Knight c6 is the Chigorin. Yes, but the main moves are these three: c6, e6, and d takes c4. So my opponent went for c6, which defines the Slav defense. Now, I know that there is a lot of theory in the main lines with 3 knight f3, 3 knight c3, 3 e3, for example. There is lots of theory, so I wanted to keep things simple and practical for me, while also playing a position where I have some slight chances for an advantage. So I went for the exchange variation of the Slav defense. It's becoming very popular recently. And now I find that the most accurate move order is the one with bishop f4 followed by e3. And the reason is to avoid some tricky sidelines where black goes for the e5 break. So now they played g6 though, which I was quite unfamiliar with. And to be honest, I didn't know the theory. Of course, in daily chess, you can look at opening files and opening books, but you cannot use an engine. So I just thought to proceed with normal development, because that's generally a good advice on what you should do when you are caught unprepared, is to just proceed with normal development. And I played e3. It opens up my light square bishop, and it's a move that you want to make after you have developed your dark square bishop outside of the pawn chain. So my opponent proceeded with bishop g7, and I brought a fresh piece out, my knight to c3, occupying its most natural square and controlling the center. Now my opponent went e6 though, and there is a general rule that the moves e6 and g6 do not work very well together. And the reason for this is that usually they weaken the dark squares. So I thought immediately if there was a way to exploit this, and I came up with the move knight b5, because the knight on b5 in combination with the bishop on f4 target the dark squares, as I said, c7 and d6, and it's already quite unpleasant for black, as black does not have a way to defend both of them. So my opponent played queen a5 check, and the good news for me is that the knight is defended by my light square bishop on f1, so I can block queen d2, and I'm not forced to retreat, or I'm not in any danger of losing my knight. So I blocked queen d2, and now after an exchange of queens, yes, I have lost the right to castle because I moved my king. However, this is completely irrelevant because my attack is devastating. For instance, I'm threatening knight c7, which forks the rook. I'm threatening knight d6 check, and maybe I'm even threatening knight takes a7, rook takes a7, and then bishop takes b8, or the other way around, bishop takes b8, rook takes b8, and knight takes a7. So I've got many threats, and black cannot deal with all of them. So they defended against the main threat of knight c7 by going knight a6. But as long as my knight can stay there on b5, their knight has to be stuck on a6. And we know very well that the knight on the rim is dim. That's a general chess principle. Of course, there are some exceptions sometimes where a knight on the edge of the board can be very powerful, but not here. So I proceeded with knight d6, giving a check. And here it would have certainly been better for my opponent if they took their king somewhere where f7 was defended. And the two options for that were king f8 and king e7. But by going to d8 or to d7, they allow me to pick up the pawn on f7, and then I'm completely winning because now there is a check, so it's a fork. The king has to move, and then I will be taking the rook on h8. They will be taking my knight, but I will be an exchange and a pawn up. So yeah, this is a massive advantage for white, and here I managed to win. Let's see my game against the same opponent with black. So here I have the black pieces, and yeah, with black I didn't do many experiments in the openings. I stayed loyal to my main weapons, which are the French defense. It featured in many of my games. In all my games that started with 1e4, I played the French defense. So here my opponent went for the advanced variation. The other main options are the exchange variation with e takes d5, the classical variation with 3 knight c3, the Tarrasch variation with 3 knight d2, and even the recently becoming trendy Schlechter variation with 3 bishop d3. The a5 on move 3 is the advanced variation and has been gaining popularity recently. It's been the choice of Sveshnikov, the legendary player, and also a new book has been written about it by Gawain Jones, where he proposes it for white. Now I played c5, which is the main move, and the two main pawn breaks in the French defense are c5 and f6. So here I went for c5. Another possible move would be to go b6, intending to exchange the light square bishops, because if you can exchange the light squared bishops and you're on the black side of the French, this is a major achievement positionally, because the light square bishop is black's worst piece, at least for the moment. So I went c5 instead, though, the main move. My opponent played c3, supporting the center. And now I went knight c6, knight f3, and here I played bishop d7, which is the move that Simon Williams recommends in his lovely course in chess.com, which is named Why Simon Loves the French Defense. And I'm a massive fan of Simon Williams, so why not follow him? This is a move that one of my favorite players, Nigel David Short, used to beat Alexander Grischuk. Grischuk is also a well-known player of the advanced variation. So yeah, bishop d7 is a great move. Other possible moves are queen b6, which is the choice of Anish Giri, and also knight g2e7 is a decent move. It featured yesterday in the game of Rapport against Karyakin in the Waikanze tournament. So I went bishop d7, and here my opponent went for bishop e3. The main moves in this position are bishop d3 that Gawain Jones proposes, bishop e2, and also some people play a3. Now after a3, Simon Williams recommends f6, which he finds to be good for black. Bishop d3 is a pawn sacrifice, because after bishop d3 takes, and if takes, queen b6 and castles, and now knight takes d4 wins a pawn, because after knight takes, queen takes, there is no bishop b5 check at the end. This is the reason the bishop goes to d7. So instead, what does Gawain Jones give? He gives the move castles, and after queen b6, because you cannot allow, as black, white to take back the pawn, because they will just have a space advantage. So queen b6 is the move here, and now rook e1 is the move that Gawain gives in his book. Anyway, my opponent went for bishop e3, and I need to say I was not familiar with the theory here. So I played queen b6. I'm hitting the b2 pawn, queen b3 by my opponent, and here I thought to simplify, so I exchanged the queens, and I've given them doubled pawns. And now I took on d4, and they took back with the knight. If they had taken back with the pawn, I would be happy with a better pawn structure and a long-term advantage. So they took back with the knight, which was even worse, I think, because it allows me to take a free pawn on e5. And now I have two central pawns. Well, they have 0. So bishop b5 was played by my opponent, and I went for normal development with bishop to d6, because I need to develop my kingside forces as well. a6 would not mean a lot, because I'm not threatening to take the bishop because of my rook on a8 hanging. So instead I went bishop d6. And here I assume that my opponent lost on time, because in this tournament you only have one day, only 24 hours per move. It's a no vacation tournament, so the schedule can be quite demanding by playing 22 games at the same time. So I assume they lost on time. However, I was a clear pawn up, and there is no compensation for white. So I'm moving on to my game now against number 8, who was El Parufzako from Poland, and he was also the top seed along with me. We both started off with a 1600 provisional, I assume, rating, because I personally had never played daily chess before. I only play the blitz and bullet time controls. I don't even play the rapid time control, because I find it too long and too boring for my taste. I believe that online chess should be fast. So here, again, I opened up with 1d4. My opponent played d5, and after c4 they went for e6. So yeah, it's the queen's gambit declined. But now after knight c3, here there are many moves in this position. Knight f6 is the main move. Bishop e7 is the choice of Kasparov. Bishop b4 is also possible. c5 is the Tarrasch. What else can they play? Even f5, it would lead to a Stonewall Dutch. c6 was played in the game. And okay, after c6, I had to make a choice. Would I play e3 or e4? E4 is the move that Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, played in his world championship match in 2013 in India against Vishwanathan Anand, where he became the world champion for the first time. So e4 was played in that game, and here the main move is d takes e4, but also bishop b4 is possible. But after these moves here, the main theory is bishop d2, but in that game, Carlsen against Anand in the world championship match of 2013, Carlsen played knight c3, so he just wanted to get a playable position and eventually outplay his opponent. But bishop d2 is the main move, and after queen takes e4, bishop takes e4, queen takes e4 check. Here White has a choice if they will block the check with the knight or with the bishop on e2. And this is a very theoretical position, and I'm not really certain what is the current state of theory right now. So instead I play d3, which is going to lead to the Meran variation if my opponent goes knight f6 and I go knight f3. But this did not happen. My opponent went for bishop b4, so pinning my knight. And here I thought, why don't I simply play a3 to ask the bishop what it wants to do? So they took and I took. But here I was happy because they have their pawn on d5, and this guarantees to me that I will not be left with the doubled pawns on the c file. Because in the Nimzo Indian defense that I have played for many years with black, one thing I like about it is that I leave my opponent with doubled pawns, which is a strategical long-term advantage. But here, because of the pawn being on d5 and not on d7 or d6, White has the option of getting rid of the doubled pawns. And I have the bishop pair too, so I was relatively happy to reach this position. My opponent was piece out, and so did I, castles. And here I played h3, which the engine didn't like too much. I just didn't want to allow the bishop to come to g4 after, for instance, I take here. And I go bishop d3, which is the most natural move. I didn't want the bishop to be able to come to g4. So it was, let's say, a prophylactic move to go h3. And now after knight e4, I'm hitting the c3 pawn. Sorry, my opponent is hitting the c3 pawn. So I need to defend it, and I went for queen c2, what more natural. And now b6 was played, and I went for bishop d3, just getting a fresh piece out in its most active square and also hitting the enemy knight. So knight f6 was the choice of my opponent. Perhaps they could have played f5 to support it as well, even though that would weaken the e5 square. So they went for knight f6, and here I just simply castled. And my opponent went for bishop a6. So they want to exchange their light square bishop. And this is a strategically good idea by them, because all my pawns in the center are on the dark squares, at least most of them, c3, d4, and e3, and the c4 pawn is soon going to be exchanged. So by exchanging light square bishops, it's positionally favorable to black. So this is the reason why I did not want to play the move c takes d5, and instead I thought to activate my knight and improve it even more by putting it on the e5 square. Now I'm also keeping an eye on the c6 square, so if they play knight b7, it would be a blunder because they would lose the c6 pawn. So what happened was queen c7, so black is putting their queen on the c file, which soon there could be tension on it. And I went for the move a4. So I want to activate my bishop from the a3 square, since it's quite an attractive diagonal for my bishop. And after the move d takes c4, I thought to take back with the knight, because my knight now is also controlling the d6 square. So I have some ideas of bishop a3 and keeping control of d6. My opponent took my knight and I took back. And after knight bd7, I was happy to reach this position because I have two bishops against two knights and I have an extra central pawn. So I just wanted to open up the position for my bishops and take control of the center. So I went for the move e4. And after the move e5 by my opponent, I thought to play f4 to challenge their central pawn once again. And they took and I took back. And here I want to just play e5 and expand even more. And after the move rook f8, I went for e5. And here my opponent is already in trouble because the knight is a bit short of squares. It could only possibly go to the g4, to the h5 square. But instead, my opponent made a blunder and they went to the d5 square, after which I can just play bishop takes d5 and they cannot take back because I will take their queen on c7. So they lost a piece and they resigned. I was quite happy with this game. Now, against the same opponent with the black pieces, I faced the bird opening. And as a matter of fact, the first time in my life I faced the bird's opening in a standard time control game was in 2016, and it was also by a player from Poland. So this is not a coincidence. So I went for this setup, and to be honest, I have never really studied in detail the bird's opening. All I know is that it's a reverse Dutch. So white is playing a Dutch with an extra tempo. So I thought to go for this King's Indian defense setup, even though I have never played the King's Indian even a single time in my whole life. But here it's quite a good idea because, yeah, I just want to get my pieces out. Now I played the move c6 after knight c3 just to control the d5 and the b5 squares, because I think that's a great idea. I don't want the knight to have easy access to them. And also I might want to put my queen on the c7 square. So after the move b3 by my opponent, the knight on c3 is no longer defended. So I thought to play the move e5 and break in the center. And after the move f takes e5, d takes e5, d takes e5, and knight g4, I really liked my position because I'm going to have a favorable pawn structure. And after queen d2, I took with this knight on e5. And yeah, I like my position here because their pawn on e3 is relatively weak. After an exchange of queens, I have some threats in this position. For example, knight takes f3 check, bishop takes f3, and bishop takes c3. So my opponent played bishop b2 to defend, but I took the pawn on e3. I'm hitting their rook. And after they took on e5, this must have been a blunder because they must have assumed I would have played bishop takes e5, but instead I took the rook on f1, so I'm winning material. And after they took back, I took their knight. And after bishop c4, I defended the threat on f7 by going bishop e6, because it's a general principle. When you're winning, you want to offer exchanges of pieces that are of equal value. So I liked bishop e6 by me. And after the move bishop d3, which correctly, they did not exchange the light square bishops because that would simplify and it would not be in their favor, it would be in my favor. I brought my rook to d7. Now they went to rook e1, hitting my dark square bishop. I gave a check, which is useful because it pushes their king in the corner. And the king is a fighting piece in the endgame. And here it could also be useful for me in case of a bank rank mate. For example, the king is a useful piece in the endgame and it should be in the center fighting and not in the corner. So this check was useful. And after the move b5, my clear plan is to go b4 and force a trade of dark square bishops. So my opponent went b4. And here I just doubled the rooks and they resigned. Well, I'm completely winning in this position because I have an extra pawn and an extra exchange, and some simplification is going to follow. So yeah, I was overall pleased with this game against the player who had the same rating as me. We were both of us were the top seeds. So yeah, I was quite pleased because I don't face f4 very often, and I don't really have particularly good results the rare times I face it. So I'm moving on to my opponent number 7, who was Chain Markov, and they did not really have a flag I recognized because they have an international identity on chess.com. In this game, I faced the Dutch defense. I have the white pieces, and I went for 2 knights c3. And as a matter of fact, the first time in my life in May 2018, where I played 1d4 in a standard time control game, I did face the Dutch defense, and I responded in the same way with 2 knights c3. In that game, I made a draw. It was in the Renfrew Congress in Glasgow, in Scotland. Here, though, my opponent played e6, and again, as a coincidence, my opponent in that game in 2018 also played 2e6. So 2e6, though, is inaccurate because it allows the move e4, after which white is better. The best move here for black is to go either knight f6 or d5. If they go d5, this stops e4, and here white usually goes for bishop f4. But if they go knight f6, then white usually goes for bishop g5, and here e6 is possible, but the best move is d5. And then, for example, play can continue. This is just an example of how play could evolve. And we get into this position where white's main idea is to go knight c2 and then c4. Of course, black will also want to hit with the move c5. So this is just an example, but in the game I went for 3e4 to punish my opponent for going 2e6. So after takes and takes, they went d5, which again was not the best move. And I went for knight g5. Now they went h6, but they have weakened their light squares way too much, and I took advantage of it with the move queen h5 check. They cannot block with g6, and it's already very unpleasant for them. They went to the d7 square, and I went knight f3. They cannot take my knight with the pawn because I will take their rook on h8, and they cannot take with the queen because of my bishop on c1 and my knight on f3. So they went for the move knight to f6, hitting my queen. And now I gave a check on e5, the intermediate move with my knight. Their king went to d6. I gave another check with my other knight, and they went to the e7 square. And now it was time for me to move my queen. So I went to f3. And now, just to illustrate how bad this position is for black, their queen has only one square it can go to, which is e8, but I will play queen a3 check, and the only move is c5, and after queen takes c5, it's a checkmate. So instead, after my move queen f3, they played rook h7, and now I just took their queen. And here I played the move bishop d3, hitting their rook. The rook went back to h8, but after knight f7, it was a fork. And I picked up their rook as well. And after they went to knight c6, I gave another check. They went to f7, and now I took their bishop. And if they take back with their king, now I can throw in the move bishop takes h6. But anyway, the position is completely winning because if they take, I'm going to take on f6. But yeah, this game shows the dangers of not knowing the theory and also making too many pawn moves in the opening and neglecting development, because yeah, too many pawn moves and they have weakened their light squares and they have neglected their development. So I was pleased with this game, and yeah, let's see how I played with the same opponent with black. So it was another French defense as usual, and my opponent played the La Bourdonnaise variation, which is a rare sideline with the move to f4. As a matter of fact, I had faced this back in a rapid game in the Isle of Arran of Scotland from an international master back in 2019 in September. And I lost that game, but I put up a decent fight. Here I went for d5 again, and in that game, the international master played the move 3-5, while here my opponent took, which is already a compromise because their pawn on f4 slightly exposes their king. And queen e2 is also a mistake because it breaks the basic chess opening principles of not moving your queen too early. And here the queen is on an open file. So I knew that I don't want to exchange queens. Bishop e6 would be a blunder in account of f5. And there are two decent ways of blocking. One of them is bishop e7 and one of them is knight e7. But if I play knight e7, then my bishop cannot move if I don't play the move g6 and bishop g7, which would cost some moves. So why not go bishop e7, bring the knight to its most natural square on f6, castle, and then go rook e8. So this was my plan, and I executed it. And after 7 rook e8, my rook is lined up against my opponent's queen, and hg3 was a fatal blunder by my opponent, because after bishop b4, they cannot block the attack against their queen with the move bishop e3 because of knight g4. And my knight on g4 is defended by my light square bishop, and I want to take on e3 in the next move. So they are in serious trouble, and instead they gave their queen for my rook. Now I thought to just develop normally with bishop f5, and after bishop f3, I just thought to simplify, because it's a great advice. If you have a completely winning position, it's a great idea to simplify the game and exchange pieces of equal value. So I took on c3, and then I played bishop b4 to guarantee myself of even more exchanges. So after bishop takes e4 and knight takes e4, now I'm hitting their bishop on c3, but this was even better to win the exchange by going knight f2. And I took the exchange. I brought my knight out. Now we exchanged knights. I gladly go for exchanges when I'm winning. And I went c5, b4, and now I just played rook c8, a3 by my opponent. I took, opening up the c file so that I can attack their king. They took back, and now I went queen c7, threatening mate in 1 on c2. My opponent went rook d2, and now I played queen c4. So I have some ideas, and after h4, I went for queen a2. So I'm threatening again a mate in 1 with the move queen a1, checkmate. So my opponent went c3, I gave a check. They went to the c2 square, and now I played b6, preparing the move a5, but my opponent made a blunder by going rook takes d5, and now I played queen a2 check, which picks up the rook, and my opponent resigned. So now I'm going to move to game 6, where I played against Rob Starr from Germany. Germany is a country I have visited and where I have some relatives in. So again, I opened up the game with 1d4, and my opponent played the move c5, which is the old Benoni. Here I'm familiar with 3 different moves. e4 would be a direct transposition to the Smith-Morra gambit of the Sicilian defense in this case. However, after knight f3, because being a pawn down is not to my taste, I would aim for an open Sicilian, but my opponent has the move e5, and here I cannot take on e5 because of the move queen a5 check. This is something to watch out for in many openings, not only in this one. So another option is the move d5, where Yeah, this could lead to the Czech Benoni after the move to e5 with a very closed center. And another possibility is the move d takes c5, which is maybe a bit unexplored. And after the move to e6, I went for knight c3, just get a fresh piece out. So after my opponent takes on c5, I went for knight e4, aiming to win the bishop pair. Because if, for instance, they go to e7, I'm going to play knight d6 check, and I'm still going to win the bishop pair. So my opponent went for the move knight f6. And have they blundered the piece? Of course not, because of the move queen a5. I was aware of this. I played c3 to block the check. They took. So in this position, what do we have? White has the bishop pair. However, black has a slight lead in development. Their queen is well placed there because I cannot easily attack them. If I play bishop e3, they can easily drop back to c7. And they have also two central pawns while I have one. And having an extra central pawn is an advantage. So overall, I think the position is dynamically balanced. It's an interesting position to play, but it's also a position that you can play without any theoretical knowledge. You just need to bring the pieces out now. And here I was thinking about how I would proceed, if I would want to play g3 and bishop g2 perhaps, or maybe if I wanted to play e3 and the bishop to go on the d3 or the e2 squares. But e3, I didn't like it so much because it would shut down my dark square bishop. So I went for the move bishop f4. Also, it threatens bishop f4 picking up an exchange. So my opponent went knight e4. They're threatening a checkmate on the f2 square. So I went for pawn to e3. And after the move d5, I went for bishop d3, just normal development. And after knight d7, I just castled, and they went for e5, which was a blunder because it gives me a free pawn, which I took. I mean, if your opponent gives you a free pawn and there is no reason why you should not to, then you should take it. So I'm a clear pawn up, and we've also traded the knights, which is in my favor because now I have a bishop pair. And okay, rook e8 hits my bishop, and I go bishop d4, gaining a tempo on their queen. The queen goes back to e7, and here I played the move queen h5, just activating my queen. And I have some threats, such as going f3, because if they play a bad move like a6, now I can play the move f3, hitting the knight. And if the knight drops back to f6, I can remove the defender by going bishop takes f6. And if they play queen takes f6, I can take on h7. Possibly a better alternative for them would be to go check here and then take on d3. This would have been possibly better for them. But instead, after queen h5, I went for the move queen h6. So my queen is well placed there. And it's threatening a checkmate on g7. So they went f6 to defend the checkmate, but since my bishop is well placed on the d4 square and it protects e3, I can afford to go f3 because e3 is also well defended. And here they should have played the knight somewhere else, but if the knight goes there, it's not ideally placed, and I hit it with the move rook fd1. But here they absolutely should have went for the move knight c4. It was the only way to save their knight. And fortunately for me, they failed to find it. Instead, they played the move knight takes f3, and I played queen takes f3, winning a piece. And after queen f7 and rook e1, they resigned. Because here I'm a clear piece up and they have no compensation. How did I do against the same opponent with black? Well, in this game, I went for the French defense as usual, and my opponent played the Schlechter variation with 3 bishop d3, which is a very tricky sideline. And the first time I became aware of this move was in the European Rapid Championship in 2017 in Katowice in Poland, where I played myself and I scored 5.5 out of 11. In the first round, I played against Luke McShane, one of the best players from the UK, where I currently live in. And what stunned me the most was that in the last round, Maxim Vavulin from Russia played 3 bishop d3 to beat Jan Krzysztof Duda, who is now already qualified for the candidates tournament. And yeah, such a strong player like Duda, he did not know the theory and he made a serious mistake in that game. And that cost him the European Rapid Championship because he was leading by half a point and all he needed was a draw with black. And in that tournament, he was playing the Fort Knox variation, which is after knight c3 takes bishop d7. But in that game, he had some trouble against bishop d3 and ended up with a losing position from the opening. So I've started playing bishop d3 myself also. And I recently won a game with it from the black side too. So in this position, I played the move d takes e4. The other main move is the move c5, which is the move that Simon Williams recommends in his course in chess.com. And the idea is to play with an isolated queen's pawn and perhaps state that the bishop on d3 is not ideally placed. This exact position can arise also from the exchange variation of the French defense after bishop d3, c5. It's a direct transposition. So c5 is possible. Personally, I would rather play against the isolated queen's pawn than to play with it. However, it's definitely an interesting try. I went for the more direct move, d takes e4, bishop takes e4, knight f6, hitting the bishop, and the only move in this position that would make any sense for white setup is the move bishop f3. Because if you are familiar with the Catalan, you will know about the pressure on the long diagonal against the b7 pawn, for example. And the difficulty that black faces in developing their light square bishop in the Catalan. So bishop f3 keeps the bishop where it should be, and the whole idea of the system is to meet c5 with knight e2. And now knight c6, best met with bishop e3. And yes, this is where the game starts, basically. A well-known trap is after the move c5, e takes d5, queen takes d5. Here, the trap is knight c3, hitting the queen, and after queen takes g2, bishop e4, this move wins the black queen. So black is in serious trouble. Basically, black has lost the game here, and this is something that black pairs should avoid. So in the game they took, and after knight f6, they went bishop g5, which pins my knight on my queen, and I went bishop g7, just natural development, and now I've renewed the threat. However, they did not react correctly, and they played knight c3, and here I took advantage of it by going knight takes e4, because if they play bishop takes e7, I will play the move knight takes c3, and if they take on c3, I take their bishop and I'm a piece up, and if they take on d8, I will take their queen, and now I will still be a piece up. If they play rook takes d1, I'm going to play king takes d8, and if they move their bishop like take this pawn, I'm going to take on b2, and I'm still a clear piece up. So black is completely winning, and after knight takes e4, I took on g5, and here they have some serious issues. Their hope is down, but it made it even worse by going queen d2, and after which I win their queen and they resigned. Unfortunate for my opponent, but tactics are very, very important. Moving on to number 5, I'm playing against Testa Di Cocker, who comes from Italy as well. So he's my second opponent from Italy. And in this game, I had a very important choice to make because my opponent on move 2 played the Queen's Gambit accepted, and the Queen's Gambit accepted is my favorite response against 1d4. So Personally, I was playing the Nimzo Indian and the Queen's Indian for many years, but back in 2019, I decided to make a change and try out the Queen's Gambit Accepted. And what I liked about it was that there is not as much theory as other openings, and I would recommend to any beginner that is struggling against 1d4 to give the Queen's Gambit Accepted a try, because you don't need to know that much theory, and you can get good positions. It has a sound reputation, and it has even been played by many world champions. For example, Garry Kasparov used it in his 2000 match against Vladimir Kramnik in London, where he lost, of course. Well, in this game, I went for 3 knight f3. The other main moves are 3 e4 and 3 e3. So I go for knight f3, and the idea of knight f3 is to stop the variation e3 e5, which I have played myself with black. So I played knight f3, and they went f6, which is a massive error because you don't want to move that pawn. It weakens the king, and the king usually castles short in this opening. So this was a massive mistake by my opponent, and I thought to take advantage of it by going e4, just taking full control of the center, and I'm threatening to win the pawn back with bishop takes c4. So my opponent went e6, which is certainly a much better move than the previous one. I took the pawn on c4, and they went knight c6. I just simply castled. After the move knight a5, they have violated another opening principle, which is not moving the same piece twice. And here I thought to take advantage of that by going queen a4. The only move here for black was the move c6, which would protect the knight because the queen now defends the knight on a5. And they have also a threat of going b5. And also, in general, I don't want to lose my bishop pair because it's an open position, and I don't want to lose the bishop pair. So bishop d3 would probably be my choice here. So instead, they played the move knight c6, which immediately loses a piece after the move d5. And after e takes d5, e takes d5, knight e7. Here I thought about taking the knight, and I'm a piece up for a pawn, and now I gave an annoying check on e1. So they blocked with the bishop, but now their bishop is tied down, and I just brought a fresh piece into the attack. The problem with the move f6 is that it disables them from castling and getting their king to safety. So their king is stuck in the center. They went a6, and here I just got a fresh piece out, my bishop to f4. I had, of course, seen that b5 does not work because I can play the move knight takes b5. Bishop takes b5 is also possible, yeah. And here, after they take, I'm going to take on a8, and when they take on c4, I will take on c6, giving them a check as well. And after bishop d7, I have plenty of good moves, but I took on c7, just thinking to simplify. They avoided the exchange of queens, but I increased the pressure on e7, threatening a checkmate. And after queen d8, I just took. They took back, and I went to rook e1. So here I'm completely winning because they have to lose their queen. And after bishop e6, I just took on e6, and they resigned. So I was quite happy with this game by myself. And how did I do against them with black? Well, it was a slightly harder game. So it was another French defense as usual, and one more advanced variation. So yes, 3e5 was the choice of my opponent. I went c5, and now they went knight c3, which is not so good because it enables me to take on d4 with a tempo, and now they take back with the queen, but I can get another tempo by going knight c6, hitting their queen. And they went queen a4, yes, which pins my knight, but I can go for the move bishop d7, which lines up my bishop against their queen and also breaks the pin. So knight takes e5 is a threat. And here they went for the move knight b5. And here I just took the pawn because now their knight is pinned onto their queen. And they went queen b3 to unpin it. Now I went for the move a6, which attacks their knight again. And they went for the move bishop to f4. Here I thought to simplify the position, and I went for the move bishop takes b5, and after bishop takes b5, a takes b5, queen takes b5, queen d7. My opponent went for the move queen takes d7, knight takes d7. So we've simplified the position, and I'm a clear pawn up, and I also have two central pawns. Well, they don't have any, but also I'm a piece up. Yeah, so they've made a mistake here because yeah, here they should have taken on e5, which they didn't. They took on b5, and I played queen d7, and now they are completely lost, because if they take on e5, of course I'm going to take their queen, and if they take here, I should take back with the knight, which wins me a piece. So yeah, the same number of pawns, but an extra piece for black. I made a mistake, I'm sorry. Knight f3 was their move, and I just went for normal development, bring a fresh piece out with knight gf6, castles, bishop c5, a3, castles, b4, bishop e7, bishop d2. Now I went for knight e4, hitting their bishop, because again, I want to go for exchanges of pieces of equal value, and also having a centralized knight on e4 is an asset for me. And I've also freed up the f6 square for my bishop to go there, because why not put my dark square bishop on the f6 square. So after the move rook fd1, I played bishop f6 following my plan. It's important to be consistent with your plans. And after the move rook ab1, I can win a pawn on a3, but and I did that. They went rook b3, so why not go for another exchange, and one more here. And now I just went to rook a1, threatening a back rank mate with the move rook a1. They defended against it. Now I brought my king as well, because it's important to have an active king in the endgame. And after the move h4, I went for king e7, g4. I need to be a bit careful with my bishop, but that's not really something to worry about, because I can go king d6, improve my king even further. And after rook c2, I went for a rook a1 check. They went for the move knight e1, and now I took another pawn on h4, because the knight was defending that pawn, but not anymore. They went for the move b5, and I went for rook b1, just hitting their pawn on b3. They went for rook c3, and I went for bishop f6. And after rook h3, I just went h6. King e2 was their choice, and I played the move knight c5, just hitting the pawn on b3. Now after the move knight d3, I went for another exchange of knights, because I know I'm completely winning. And then I brought my king to the c5 square. I want to win the pawn on b5 and then attack the pawn on b3 as well. They went king d2. I took that pawn. They went king c2 to my rook. I gave them a check. They went back. And now I took the pawn on f2. So another achievement for me is that I have forced their king into the last rank. And here they resigned. Okay, so it was quite a good game from my side. Now I'm moving on to game 4, which I played against Henkiede Penkie 8 from the Netherlands. And it was another Slav defense. So I went for the exchange variation, and again, bishop f4, knight c6, e3. In my opinion, the best move order for white. And after the move e6, I just got a fresh piece out, knight c3, knight f6. And here I was accurate with my move order, because I did not want to play knight to f3, and you will see shortly why I chose to go for bishop d3 instead. Because now after the move bishop d6, my main idea is to exchange the dark squared bishops and now play the move f4. This is why I delayed the move knight f3 to play the move f4 first, because the move f4 and the move d4 give me very good control of the e5 square. And I have a clear plan of going knight f3 and knight e5. Also, it's very hard for them to develop their dark squared bishop. Excuse me, their light square bishop, because they cannot get the a5 break in, and if they play b6 and bishop b7, their bishop will not be particularly useful on the b7 square. So I like this position very much for white, and if I was guaranteed to have this position every time, then I would always be playing the exchange variation of the Slav defense. Of course, black has some other interesting alternatives. So after the move castles, knight f3, my opponent went for knight b4, and I went for bishop b1, and they went for knight e4, which was a blunder because I can win a pawn, and now I'm a clear pawn up. They went for h6, which makes some sense because it controls the g5 square and it takes away any Greek gift sacrifice ideas that I might have, and I have made more than one videos about the Greek gift sacrifice, so feel free to check them out. So after h6, I just went for normal development with castling, and after b6, this was a serious blunder because I can win their rook on a8, and after the move bishop a6, they're hitting my rook on f1. And here I played the move bishop e4, just bringing back my bishop to safety. It's the only square on e4 where it will be safe. I thought it's better to protect my bishop and let them have an exchange on f1, which would mean I'm a piece up, because if I move the rook, now if they take on a8, which they will do, then I'm going to be an exchange up, and I would rather be a piece up than an exchange up. So I took with the queen. I don't want to move my king, just keep my king in safety. And they went knight c2. It was another horrific blunder. I take it. And now after rook c8, I went for queen d3. Queen d3 protects the bishop and also threatens to invade in the h7 square. They went queen c6. Okay, and I went for it. Queen h7, king f8 is their only move. And now I went for bishop e4, hitting their queen. They go to b5, but now by going to b5, they no longer protect their rook on c8, so I can give a check and pick up their rook. Now they took on b2, and I played rook c1. They took on a2. I gave a check. They went to f7, and queen d8, checkmate. However, here it was instructive for me to learn, with the help of the engine, of course, that I have a faster checkmate with queen c7, because if king f6, queen d8 is a checkmate, and if king f8, queen d8 is a checkmate, and if king e8, then bishop c6, king f8, and now queen d8 is a checkmate. So it was instructive for me to say I have a faster win. However, yeah, it was a game I was very satisfied about, but the same opponent played much, much better in this game, and it was by far, from all my 22 games so far in this tournament, it was my toughest win, and one that I really had to sweat for and work hard for. At some point I was losing according to the engine, so it was another Queen's Gambit accepted from my side. My favorite opening against 1d4, and my opponent went for e4. Here there are a few good moves. c5 is one of them, b5 is another, knight f6 is also a good move, knight c6 is another move. Yeah, but I went for e5. I played this for the first time in the 4NCL Congress in Basingstoke back in 2019, and I managed to win a stronger player than me back then. It was my first time playing it in over-the-board chess in standard time control. So yes, I played the move e5, and here they played the move knight f3. An interesting move here is this move as well, which would lead to a queen exchange, and 5 against 3 for white on the king side, while 4 against 2 for white on the queen side. So a very unbalanced game, and ideal if you want to play for a win, and maybe unexplored as well. Knight f3 is the main line though, and I took on d4. Here some people play queen takes d4 and it's just equal. Other people play bishop takes c4, which I think is the main line. And here, just to show some variations, knight c6 is the main move, after which castles, and here bishop e6, where white has a choice. Do they want to play bishop takes e6, pawn takes e6, queen b3 with a double attack against e6 and b7, and after queen d7, queen takes b7, rook b8, and queen a6. This is one position that is very topical theoretically. That's the starting point, let's say. And another possibility after bishop e6 is the move bishop b5, which pins the knight, and after bishop c5, the move b4, and after bishop b6, a4, intending to go a5, winning the bishop. And here black can play either a5 or a6. I think a6 is more accurate. And after bishop takes, pawn takes, bishop b2, this is the main line and the starting point of this position. White has a better pawn structure, but black has the bishop here, and it's going to be a massive fight that's going to lie ahead. So instead of all this, my opponent took with the knight, which was a move I was very unfamiliar with and which I underestimated. I played c5, which was not the best move. They went knight b5, why not? And after an exchange of queens, yes, they cannot castle, but they have a serious threat of knight c7 winning the rook. So I went knight a6 defended, they win back their pawn. I went for bishop d7, intending to castle long, but they played a very accurate move, bishop f4. And here, if I castled long, that would be absolutely embarrassing after knight takes a7 checkmate. So I saw that, and I played knight f6. And here they played the move rook to e1. I went for just normal development with bishop e7, and they went for king e2. Now I just castled, they went king f1, so they've brought their king to a safer square, and king safety is very important because there are many minor pieces on the board. Only the queens have been exchanged, so having a safe king is so important. I cannot stress it enough. I went for the move knight b4, threatening knight c2, forking the two white rooks. They went for knight c7. I went for rook ac8, and now they went for knight a3. Knight h5 was my move, hitting their bishop. They went for bishop e5, and I went for a6, controlling the b5 square and maybe wanting to go b5 myself. They went knight d5, I took, and they took with the bishop. Now they are hitting the b5 square, so I went bishop c6. Sorry, they're hitting the b7 pawn, so I went for bishop c6 to defend, and they went to rook a1. I went knight f6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, knight c4. Now bishop takes d5, e takes d5, b5, knight d6, rook c7, and now rook e8. After rook e8, I went for bishop takes b2, so I grabbed this pawn. They went for rook d to e1. I went for g6 because what they want to do if I play some bad move like, let's say, e4, is to just take, and give a checkmate on e8. So I had to avoid that and make some breathing space for my king. They took, I went to g7 after their check, and now they go to a8. The problem for me is that they want to go knight to e8 and pick up my rook, while also they are hitting my pawn on a7. So I have to do something absolutely about this, and I went for rook d7. So yes, they could take on a6 and the fight would continue. They gave me a check instead. I went to a safer square on h6, and now I want to win their pawn on d5. They went to f6, thinking they defended, but their knight is en prise, and I won it. So now I'm a piece up. I was very lucky in this game because, they had a very dangerous passed pawn, and they played extremely well. The way they played does not match their rating at all. It was a splendid game by my opponent, and they should be proud of themselves for it. Of course, they made a blunder, and sometimes chess can be a very harsh game because you can play many excellent moves, but one bad move can cost you the game. I went for bishop d4 just to protect my pawn and also threaten the pawn on f2 and have some rook c2 ideas. We went a5, I gave a check. Now I grabbed the pawn. They should have went king 1, but they went there, and now it's just a forced checkmate because after king h1, I have rook to f1, and it's a checkmate. So 4 games left. Now I'm going to be talking about my game against Swad Z from Brazil. And this was a relatively short game. And it featured a relatively strange opening, which was the Albin counter gambit. And this is defined by the move e5. And here the best move for white by far is to go d takes e5. And the only way for this to make any sense is to go d4. So it's a gambit by black. I went for knight c6. And here I knew that the main move was a3, proposed in most opening book manuals. a3 is useful as it stops any bishop b4 ideas, for example. But I thought to play g3, which a very good friend of mine played back in 2016 in an open tournament where I was also there, and that inspired me. And my friend is FIDE master, who has also crossed 2400. So whenever they make their IM norms, they have one, they need 2 more, they will become an IM. So g3 is what they played in that game, and they got a totally winning position, but they blundered a stalemate. So it shows you that you should always watch out for stuff like that. Anyway, that was that game. Bishop e6 is the main line, and here I went for queen a4, which is a multi-purpose move. It develops the queen, it pins the knight on c6, and it also protects the pawn on c4. Now they went for queen 7, unpinning the knight and preparing to castle long. I went for bishop g2, and they castled long. Now I went for knight g5, which creates some threats. I opened up the diagonal for my bishop. I want to maybe take their bishop on e6 at the right moment. And if their knight takes on e5, for instance, I will be taking on a7 with my queen. So I like my position. They went knight g7, and now I castled myself. They went king b8 here, and this is a move which I did not react precisely to, because I played f4 thinking I am protecting my pawn on e5, but apparently I was deeply mistaken, because after knight takes e5, my queen is undefended, so of course I cannot take the knight because they take my queen. So this is not what I'm looking for, because now I've given back the pawn. Of course, still it's a playable position, and I might as well win their bishop on e6, but I don't want to lose a pawn for nothing. Anyway, in the game, luckily, my opponent did not punish me and did not find that move. Here again, I should have played knight takes e6, for example. Instead, I went for knight e4. Okay, I have a threat of going knight c5, but again, they could have played the move knight takes e5, exploiting my undefended queen on a4. Many times, tactics arise because of undefended pieces. This is a general advice to watch out for. They went bishop to h3, so they want to exchange my fianchetto bishop. I went knight d2 because I just felt that I need to bring some more pieces to the support of my king and develop. Now they went for knight c8, intending probably knight b6 to harass my queen. I dropped back voluntarily as I felt that my queen has no purpose anymore on the a4 square. Also, c4 is no longer attacked, and also the knight defends it. They exchanged the light square bishops, which makes some sense, and now they're going for this attack. So I thought to go h4 to stop them. And after the move g5, I just took on g5, and they resigned because I'm 2 pawns up, and this sacrifice just didn't work for them. And it seems I'm in control. Of course, I would need to play accurately until the end, and it's not over unless it's over, but I have a serious advantage. Okay, now against the same opponent with the black pieces, and this was personally my favorite game in the whole tournament. It was a game which started off with the English opening, and the English opening is an opening that I've tried various different moves against. Yeah, usually I go c4-5, and after knight c3, I used to play knight f6 and go for a reverse Sicilian, but I found out about this move bishop b4, which has been played successfully by Vishwanathan Anand, the former world champion and one of my favorite players and world champions. So yeah, if you want to learn a new opening or a new variation, it's good to find like a world champion or a very strong player who is going to be like your role model, and you play through their games. This can help you improve, because who do you want to take advice from? From people that have already achieved what you want to achieve. And this is an example. Anand was well known for preferring knights over bishops, so it's no surprise he plays this opening where he gets to trade his bishop for the knight while also damaging the white pawn structure. Of course, he's surrendering the bishop pair, so everything comes with a cost. The main move here is knight d5, and black has a few options, just to name a few: bishop c5 and bishop e7. So g3 was played, and knight f3 is also possible, but both g3 and knight f3 are best met by taking on c3. Now they have a choice if they will take with the b or with the d pawn. Both moves have their pros and cons. So b takes guarantees them control of the center, while d takes, it kind of surrenders the center, but it opens up the queen, and it also opens up their dark square bishop. It's a personal taste. They took with the b pawn, I went for this setup. And yeah, bishop e6 attacks their pawn on c4. I go for my knight on e7 because I might have ideas of going f5 in the future. I just want to be a bit more flexible. Now they go for knight e2 because they might also have f4 ideas. I go for castles, queen 7, and after f4, I strike in the center with the move f5 myself. Rook b1 hits my b7 pawn, so I defended it with rook b8. And after bishop e3, I thought to open up the position and take on e4. They took back with the bishop, and now I went for bishop h3, hitting their rook. And after bishop g2, I was delighted to exchange the light square bishops. And here I went for the move knight f5, hitting their bishop on e3 and improving my knight. They went queen d2 to defend it, and now I thought to go for the move d5 to increase my central control. I would have been very happy if they took, because I would have taken back with my queen with a check. It's great for me. Instead, they played the move bishop c5, hitting my rook, and I played rook f7. Okay. And after they took on e5, I threw in this move because now they cannot take on c4 because I will take their queen. And I'm also threatening to win the d3 pawn, and I'm also threatening to win their d4 pawn. So lots of threats. They went d4, which was a mistake because I can play the move knight takes e5. And they cannot take back, of course, because they will lose their queen on d2. And I have ideas of going knight d3, for example, and my pawn on c4 is quite safe. They went for the move queen g5. And how did I react? I played knight d3, improving my knight in a very nice outpost. They took on a7. And now I went for the move rook e8. So rook e8 hits their knight on e2. And I also have the threat of going knight e3 check, which would pick up an exchange. So overall, what I liked the most about this game is that all my moves had a clear purpose, and I played simple and good chess. And I might as well continue using this variation. However, it doesn't work after g3, and here I would need to prepare something else. Now, my last opponent is Argentile 2 from the United States of America. So, yeah, they were the player that finished second. So in our game here, it was not an easy game at all. again the same position, and I went for the Meran. Knight f6, knight f3, knight bd7. So we are in the territory of the Meran, and here bishop d3 is also possible, and so is queen c2. So I went for queen c2, b6, and bishop d3, bishop b7, castles, bishop e7. And now I went for e4 because I thought, since I can play this move, why not? It will also open up my light square bishop. They took, I took, and here maybe bishop d3 was a mistake. The engines didn't like it that much because it allows them to get in the c5 break, and the c5 break is very important because it gives scope to their light square bishop. Often a problem piece for black in these queen's pawn openings, but here the bishop enjoys a beautiful diagonal. So I went for bishop e2. They castled, and I just took on c5 to release the tension, and they took back, and I went for bishop h5, just normal development, pinning their queen. And after h6, it would make no sense to take on f6, of course, so I just kept the pin. They went for rook e8, and I went for rook fd1, hitting their queen and asking it where it wants to go. The queen went to c7, and here I thought to go a3 with the idea of going b4 and expand on the queen side, as I have a queen side pawn majority. And after the move knight g4, I'm to be extremely careful, because what they want to do is play the move bishop takes f3, and then queen h2 check. So I need to be very careful. And after bishop g3, I hit their queen, and then they went to c6. I played h3, hitting their knight, and they went to f6. Now I cannot move my knight from f3 because they will checkmate me on g2. So I played the move b4 instead, hitting their bishop. It dropped back, and now I went bishop f1 just to defend g2. The bishops have an advantage of being long-range pieces. So after the move a6, I went for knight e5, which was my plan, hitting their queen. And after queen e4, here I thought, why don't I just allow an exchange of queens? The engine didn't like it, but from a practical point of view, I liked it, because here I have a clear plan of going c5 and advancing my pawns. So after rook d8, I swapped off a pair of rooks, and then I went for c5, because my favorite chess quote is the one by Aaron Nimzovich in his book, My System, and it is that the passed pawn is a criminal that must be held under lock and key. Mild measures, such as police surveillance, are not sufficient. So my favorite way to win a chess game is by advancing a passed pawn, and this is what I did here. My opponent didn't play in the best way, of course, but yeah, I managed to win this pawn. Now they went bishop d6, hitting my knight. I went for knight c6, and after a trade of bishops, they went for rook d1, pinning my bishop on f1 to my king, but I went knight a5, hitting their bishop, and after this move, I threw in a check. They went there, and now after b7, probably they should have given their bishop for the pawn. They went knight d7, but now after rook d8, they resigned. The reason is I want to play rook takes d7, and if rook takes d7, b8 queen, while if they take here, now I can take like this, and it's just completely winning. It's an extra piece, and I also have ideas of going knight c5, which they can defend against, but it's tricky. Like if here, then for instance, bishop takes a6, yes, they can unpin, but I'm completely winning with my two extra pawns on the queen side, and their majority on the king side is irrelevant. I have an extra piece. It's just completely winning. And my last game is this one, where I won with black, and it was another French defense. So I'm following Simon Williams. So knight c3 is the classical variation. I've played that myself with both colors, and after knight f6, I've played both e5 and bishop g5 myself. Even it takes d5 is a move here. Okay, so e5, knight fd7, and f4. Other moves are knight c2, and also the move knight f3. They are both also interesting. My opponent went for f4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3. Here, many moves are possible. a6 is also one of them. I went for bishop e7. I just wanted to mention that Simon Williams gives after e5 the move knight e4 in his chess.com course, but it's not really to my taste. I would rather play the main line and try and play a tricky side, especially in a correspondence game, in a daily chess game. So I went for bishop e7, just aiming for flexibility, and a well-known opening trap is after queen d2 castles, that white should not go castles because of the move c4, and this is already a massive advantage to white. And yeah, many people have done this mistake in the past. To be honest, I'm ashamed to say that once I lost this from the black side, even though it's known to be a massive advantage, more than +1 for black, and +1 in opposite side castlings is possibly even game over if black plays accurately. So yeah, after bishop e7, my opponent went for h4, which was a sideline that I was unfamiliar with, but it makes sense if they want to castle long to push those pawns, and g4 as well. And yeah, I went for a6 to control the b5 square and maybe play b5 myself. They went for queen d2, and I went for b5. So I'm just playing normal moves for the French defense. They took on c5, and I took back with the knight. And after they castled, I had a clear plan of going b4, and when they moved their knight, to go knight e4. Their best move here was to play bishop takes c5, because now I cannot take here because they'll take with the queen and they defend their bishop on c5. And after this, then they can blockade with a move like knight a4. So this was their best move. Now, after I put my knight on e4, I was very happy because it comes with a gain of tempo against their queen. And now I went for the move a5, and after queen b5, queen c7, now I wanted to go bishop a6 to attack their queen. They went for the move f5. Well, eventually I went for rook b8, also a very interesting move, hitting their queen. Possibly what put me off bishop a6 was the move queen a4, and I didn't see a way of getting rid of the queen from there. Yeah, rook b8 makes sense. I mean, I put my rook on the b file and I gain a tempo. The queen drops back to d3, and now I go for bishop d7. Maybe it was a bit slow, but still I feel that I'm better because my attack is faster and I haven't committed my king yet. In the French defense, many times you don't want to rush with castling because due to the closed center, your king might be safer in the center than on the flank. It's not a normal opening, I've said this before, and you should castle because you want to or because you are forced to, but not routinely castle without thinking in the French defense. After g4 from my opponent, I castled just so I can bring my other rook to the c8 square. So I want to play rook fc8. g5 was played, and now I thought I have to take on f5, and I didn't mind at all that they took on d5 because I can go bishop e6, and after queen d3 I went for rook f to d8. After the move knight e to d4, here I played knight takes e5, so I'm winning a pawn and I'm hitting the queen. And after a trade of knights, they dropped back their queen to the e2 square, and after knight to g3 hitting their queen, they made their last blunder by going queen h2, but now I can take on e3 with check, and they resigned. So this was my final game from round one. I really enjoyed participating in this tournament, and I'm really looking forward for round two, which will start when round one finishes. And I am very well aware that round two will be much harder than round one, but I will give my best. And maybe something I should do is to play a bit slower, because since I'm not used to this daily chess time control of 24 hours per move, I was playing a bit quickly, and against stronger opponents, it will cost me. No disrespect to my opponents in round one, but I am certain that in round two, I will face even stronger opponents, because only one player qualifies per group unless if there is a tie. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video and you took value from it. Thank you very much for watching so far. And if you're a subscriber, I will catch you at the next videos, and bye for now.